Okay, so we're about to dive into a topic that's, well, it's sensitive, but it's also incredibly important. We're going to be talking about biphobia, specifically as it's directed at bisexual men, and often in the very spaces that you'd think would know better, progressive spaces. Right off the bat, let's get one thing absolutely fundamentally clear. Women are not the enemy in this conversation. Not at all. You know, this explainer isn't about shaming anyone for having boundaries or demanding that they trust someone they don't. The whole point here is not to attack or to minimize the very real safety concerns that so many women have to navigate every single day. The reason we're digging into this is because bias is a real thing, and, it has a nasty habit of showing up where we least expect it. And when bias gets to hide behind good intentions, that's when it gets even more dangerous, because it just goes completely unexamined. So, to have this conversation in a really honest way, we have to be able to do something kind of tricky. We have to be able to hold two different, seemingly contradictory ideas in our minds at the exact same time. And here's where it gets complicated. On the one hand, a woman's right to feel safe, to set boundaries, and to say no is absolutely non-negotiable. That's a foundational truth, period. And at the same time, it's also true that bias against bisexual men is real, and it's often disguised or rationalized as just being cautious. If we can't look at both of those truths at once, we're not going to get anywhere. So let's look at the language like it's used here, because words matter. And the key word that comes up again and again and again is preference. But is it really that simple? This quote just nails it, doesn't it? The word preference sounds so neutral, so polite, so harmless, but sometimes it's just a more socially acceptable way to dress up stigma and old-fashioned prejudice. So what's the actual difference? Well, saying I don't think I'm compatible with this specific person, that's a preference. It's about an individual. But saying this entire category of people is inherently unsafe, that's not a preference anymore. That's a bias. That's when you're treating a whole diverse group of human beings as a single, dangerous stereotype. Let's be really clear about what genuine safety looks like in any relationship. It's not some vague gut feeling about a label. It's observable behavior built over time. It's things like honesty, accountability, consent, good communication. These are the things that actually build trust. And someone's sexual orientation tells you absolutely nothing about whether they have any of these qualities. So, this is the crucial question, right? If the claim is that bisexual men are unsafe, then the question has to be unsafe based on what specific behavior? Not a stereotype, not a fear, not a rumor, but an actual observable action. If you can't name the behavior, then you aren't really talking about safety. You're talking about bias. And that just begs the question, why? Why do bisexual men in particular get singled out for this specific kind of suspicion? And again, let's lead with compassion here. Women are not evil for being cautious in a world that so often gives them very good reason to be. But, and this is a big but, even a totally valid fear can curdle into bias. And that bias often lands hardest on the groups we understand the least. You see, bisexual men are handed this incredibly heavy social script from day one. The automatic assumptions are that they're lying, that they're secretly gay, that they're bound to cheat, that they can never be satisfied, that they're just inherently risky and untrustworthy. They're seen as walking, talking threats. And to be perfectly clear, this list of fears isn't based on data or some scientific conclusion. It's a cultural script. It's the punishment our society hands out to men who don't fit into neat little boxes. A man who isn't 100% straight or 100% gay, well, that's seen as ambiguous, and in our culture, that ambiguity in men is treated as a danger. Now we have to touch on something that's even more complicated, and frankly, a lot more uncomfortable: how this same bias can pop up inside the queer community itself. It's a tough question to ask, isn't it? But the answer, of course, is yes. Stigma isn't just some force from the outside. It can be internalized. It can get inside the very communities and people it has historically been used to harm. And this is where you see this really profound contradiction. You'll have someone who identifies as bisexual themselves, yet in the same breath, they'll say they would never, ever date a bisexual man. It's like bisexuality is seen as cool, acceptable, even desirable in women, but somehow it's contaminated or threatening when it exists in a man. That is a painful double standard, born from the very same prejudice. Okay, so how do we tell the difference in our own thinking? How can we draw a clear line between what is a healthy boundary and what is actually an unfair bias? This is probably the cleanest way to think about it. A boundary is all about your needs. It says, to feel safe, I require these behaviors like honesty, respect, and communication. It's based on evidence. A bias, on the other hand, says, I don't need evidence. I already know who you are just because of the category you're in. One is based on assumption, one is mature, and the other, frankly, is lazy. It is so important that we're all on the same page about the goal of this conversation, and, maybe even more importantly, what it is absolutely not about. Let me repeat this because it is vital. No one is saying anyone is entitled to another person's body, or their trust, or their time, ever. That is not and has never been the point. This isn't a discussion about entitlement. It's a discussion about fairness. It's about the basic principle of treating people as individuals, not as stereotypes.
Ultimately, the whole thing just boils down to this one choice. Are we going to judge people based on their character and their actions, or are we going to punish them for simply belonging to a group that makes us feel uncomfortable?
I'll just leave you with this final thought to chew on. If your definition of safety requires an entire group of people to just disappear, to be erased from your dating pool, is what you're fighting for really safety? Or is it control?